Chapter 17, Part 2 of Fanny Herself. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Fanny Herself by Edna Ferber. Part 2 of Chapter 17. And the 15th of October came. It had dragged for weeks, and then at the end it galloped. By that time Fanny had got used to seeing Theodore's picture and name outside Orchestra Hall and in the musical columns of the papers. Brandeis. Theodore Brandeis, the violinist. The name sang in her ears. When she walked on Michigan Avenue during that last week, she would force herself to march straight on past Orchestra Hall, contenting herself with a furtive and oblique glance at the announcement board. The advance programs hung, a little bundle of them, suspended by a string, from a nail on the wall near the box office, so that ticket purchasers might rip one off and peruse the week's musical menu. Fanny longed to hear the comment of the little groups that were constantly forming and dispersing about the box office window. She never dreamed of allowing herself to hover near it. She thought sometimes of the woman in the businesslike gray skirt and the black sateen apron who had drudged so cheerfully in the little shop so that Theodore Brandeis's name might shine now from the very top of the program in heavy black letters. Soloist, Mr. Theodore Brandeis, violin. The injustice of it. Fanny had never ceased to rage at that. In the years to come, Theodore Brandeis was to have that adulation which the American public, temperamentally so cold, gives its favorite, once the ice of its reserve is thawed. He was to look down on that surging, tempestuous crowd which sometimes packs itself about the foot of the platform in Carnegie Hall, demanding more, after a generous concert is concluded. He had to learn to protect himself from those hysterical, enraptured, wholly feminine adorers who swarmed about him, scaling the platform itself. But of all this there was nothing on that Friday and Saturday in October. Orchestra Hall audiences are not, as a rule, wildly demonstrative. They were no exception. They listened attentively, appreciatively. They talked critically and favorably on the way home. They applauded generously. They behaved as an Orchestra Hall audience always behaves, and would behave even if it were confronted with a composite Elman Chrysler Ysaye soloist. Theodore's playing was, as a whole, perhaps the worst of his career. Not that he did not rise to magnificent heights at times, but it was what is known as uneven playing. He was torn emotionally, nervously, mentally. His playing showed it. Fanny, seated in the auditorium, her hands clasped tight, her heart hammering, had a sense of unreality as she waited for Theodore to appear from the little door at the left. He was to play after the intermission. Fanny had arrived late, with Theodore, that Friday afternoon. She felt she could not sit through the first part of the program. They waited together in the anteroom. Theodore, looking very slim and boyish in his frock coat, walked up and down, up and down. Fanny wanted to straighten his tie. She wanted to pick an imaginary thread off his lapel. She wanted to adjust the white flower in his buttonhole. He jerked it out presently, because it interfered with his violin, he said. She wanted to do any one of the foolish, futile things that would have served to relieve her own surcharged feelings. But she had learned control in these years, and she yielded to none of them. The things they said and did were, perhaps, almost ludicrous. "How do I look?" Theodore demanded, and stood up before her. "Beautiful," said Fanny, and meant it. Theodore passed a hand over his cheek. "Cut myself shaving, damn it." "It doesn't show." He resumed his pacing. Now and then he stopped, and rubbed his hands together with a motion we use in washing. Finally, "I wish you'd go out front," he said almost pettishly. Fanny rose without a word. She looked very handsome. Excitement had given her color. The pupils of her eyes were dilated, and they shone brilliantly. She looked at her brother. He stared at her. They swayed together. They kissed and clung together for a long moment. Then Fanny turned and walked swiftly away, and stumbled a little as she groped for the stairway. The bell in the foyer rang. The audience strolled to the auditorium. They lagged, Fanny thought. They crawled. She told herself that she must not allow her nerves to tease her like that. She looked about her with outward calm. Her eyes met Fenger's. He was seated alone. It was he who had got a subscription seat for her from a friend. She had said she preferred to be alone. She looked at him now, and he at her, and they did not nod nor smile. The house settled itself flutteringly. A man behind Fanny spoke. "Who's this Brandeis?" "I don't know. A new one. German, I guess. They say he's good. Chrysler's the boy who can play for me, though." The orchestra was seated now. Stock, the conductor, came out from the little side door. Behind him walked Theodore. There was a little, impersonal burst of applause. Stock mounted his conductor's platform and glanced paternally down at Theodore, who stood at the left, violin and bow in hand, bowing. The audience seemed to warm to his boyishness. They applauded again, and he bowed in a little series of jerky bobs that waggled his coat tails. Heels close together, knees close together, a German bow. And then a polite series of bobs addressed to Stock and his orchestra. Stock's long, slim hands poised in air. His fingertips seemed to draw from the men before him the first poignant strains of Theodore's concerto. Theodore stood, slim and straight. Fanny's face, lifted toward him, was a prayerful thing. Theodore suddenly jerked back the left lapel of his coat in a little movement Fanny remembered as typical in his boyish days, nuzzled his violin tenderly, and began to play. It's the most excruciating of instruments, the violin, or the most exquisite. I think Fanny actually heard very little of his playing. Her hands were icy, her cheeks were hot. The man before her was not Theodore Brandeis, the violinist, but Teddy, the bright-haired, knickered schoolboy who played to those people seated in the yellow wooden pews of the temple in Winnebago. The years seemed to fade away. He crouched over his violin to get the cello tones for which he was to become famous, and it was the same hunched, almost awkward pose that the boy had used. Fanny found herself watching his feet as he shifted his position. He was nervous, and he was not taken out of himself. She knew that because she saw the play of his muscles about the jawbone. It followed that he was not playing his best. She could not tell that from listening to him. Her music sense was dulled. She got it from these outward signs. The woman next to her was reading a program absorbedly, turning the pages regularly and with care. Fanny could have killed her with her two hands. She tried to listen detachedly. The music was familiar to her. Theodore had played it for her, again and again. The last movement had never failed to shake her emotionally. It was the glorious and triumphant cry of a people tried and unafraid. She heard it now, unmoved. And then Theodore was bowing his little jerky bows, and he was shaking hands with Stock and with the first violin. He was gone. Fanny sat with her hands in her lap. The applause continued. Theodore appeared again, bowed. He bent very low now, with his arms hanging straight. There was something gracious and courtly about him, and foreign. He must keep that, Fanny thought. They like it. She saw him off again. More applause. Encores were against the house rules. She knew that. Then it meant they were pleased. He was to play again. A group of Hungarian dances this time. They were wild, gypsy things, rising to frenzy at times. He played them with spirit and poetry. To listen sent the blood singing through the veins. Fanny found herself thinking clearly and exaltedly. This is what my mother drudged for, and died for, and it was worth it. And you must do the same if necessary. Nothing else matters. What he needs now is luxury. He's worn out with fighting. Ease, peace, leisure. You've got to give them to him. It's no use, Fanny. You lose. In that moment she reached a mark in her spiritual career that she was to outdistance but once. Theodore was bowing again. Fanny had scarcely realized that he had finished. The concert was over. The group of dances, the man behind her was saying as he helped the girl next to him with her coat. But I didn't like that first thing. Church music, not concert. Fanny found her way back to the anteroom. Theodore was talking to the conductor and one or two others. He looked tired, and his eyes found Fanny's with appeal and relief in them. She came over to him. There were introductions, congratulations. Fanny slipped her hand over his with a firm pressure. Come, dear, you must be tired. At the door they found Fenger waiting. Theodore received his well-worded congratulations with an ill-concealed scowl. My car's waiting, said Fenger. Won't you let me take you home? A warning pressure from Theodore. Thanks, no. We have a car. Theodore's very tired. I can quite believe that. Not tired.